Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for joining us today for this year's edition of our Capability Enhancement Workshop for Journalists. My name is Didia Asuzu, and I'll be moderating today's session. This is our 7th year of holding this workshop, and for obvious reasons, we're hosting it virtually today. We welcome you all, especially those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Some housekeeping before we proceed. Please note that this session is being recorded. You will notice that you've been muted to avoid any interruptions. However, for the interactive session with our facilitators later, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom right corner of your screen to type in your questions. If you have any prepared questions already, you can start putting them in, and when it is time, we will present them to the facilitator. It is now my pleasure to invite Taiwo Oyedele. Many of you will be familiar with him. He is the PwC Fiscal Policy Partner and West Africa Tax Leader. He will give his opening remarks now. Taiwo.
Thank you very much, Julia. Welcome to all our participants. We are glad that you're able to join us today. We welcome you to the 2020 PwC's Media Capacity Workshop. This year, it's a virtual event necessitated by COVID-19, which has altered the way we live, the way we work, and the way we play. But one thing COVID-19 has not altered is our purpose, which is to build trust in society and solve important problems. We therefore continue to believe in a vibrant media, free press, and excellent journalism, which are important elements for a good society, and even more critical in a time such as this. At PwC, we have been engaging with key stakeholders and supporting governments and businesses in their responses to COVID-19. One of such engagements is our event today. But you're not just a key stakeholder. You are our heroes in these extraordinary times, as many of you put your lives at risk to spotlight important issues, giving voice to those who cannot speak for themselves, influencing and shaping the decisions and actions of policymakers, sharing reliable information in this age of widespread misinformation, and saving lives in the process. Well done, and we thank you for this. Today, we will be sharing insights with you on key topics which you have selected, including tracking and reporting metrics that matter, the future of journalism, and the new CAMA 2020 and its impact on the ease of doing business and Nigeria's competitiveness. We're glad that you're able to join us. Please keep an open mind as we go through the session today, which promises to be educative and insightful. I will now yield the floor back to the anchor for today's event, as I thank you very much and welcome you once again to the session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taiwo. We'll go straight to our topic, the first topic for today, which is on economic sustainability, tracking and reporting the metrics that matter. This session will be facilitated by Dr. Andrew S. Nevin, Partner and Chief Economist for PwC Nigeria. Andrew is one of our leading global thinkers, working at the complex intersection of economic strategy, capital markets, and investment. He has over 33 years of professional experience as an entrepreneur, private equity investor, economist, and strategy consultant. He's also the financial services leader for PwC West Africa, member of the advisory board at Lagos Business School, and founding director of the Africa Institute for Public Administration. He appears quite frequently on television, in the print media, commenting on economic issues facing Nigeria. Many of you will be familiar as well with Andrew. So welcome, Andrew. Over to you, Andrew.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Let me echo, sorry, I'm just trying to get my presentation up. Let me echo Taiwo's words in saying just how honored we are to be with you all this morning, and just the incredibly critical role that journalism plays in all societies, and particularly in Nigeria right now with so many complex issues that we need to deal with in this world of disinformation. We really appreciate your courage and your efforts at this time. I have to say, please, Delia, I'm having a little bit of trouble pushing the share content button. Oh, there we go. So please, thank you so much. Let's see if I can move it. So I'm going to have to ask you to move the slides. But welcome, everyone. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes just about some of the things that we see in business journalism to help kind of improve the impact of it on that. So really, as the title says here, we've got tracking and reporting the metrics that matter. So next slide, please. And so let's just stand back a little bit and talk about business and economic journalism, which is, as we said, so critical for Nigeria at this point in time. So what is this about? From our perspective, it's really how do you present, how do you track, record, analyze, and present, as we say here, what's going on in the economy and the financial situation in the economy, and do it in a way that is really meaningful. So you have a few roles on here. You need to do all of this, track, record, analyze, write about it. You need to keep people informed. But you need to play a role where you're going deeper into these issues and further insights into issues. And you can really tell, I'll come to some examples, but when I see some output from a journalist where there hasn't been a lot of thought put out about what is really going on, they're just repeating some numbers perhaps issued by the NBS or someone else, or a journalist that's really gone deeper and providing a kind of really balanced view, further insights on that. And another role in all of this is you're there to get behind some of these numbers. So dig deeper into what's really going on and really have some critical thought about that. So we want to make sure that everyone who's covering the business community, the financial issues in Nigeria, is kind of keeping this broader role in place. Next slide, please. So what are some of the issues that we're seeing we want to kind of highlight in this session? So here's sort of four of them. I mean, we often see just a repetition of government statistics with no context. We're not, we're very positive on National Bureau of Statistics. We think Dr. Kelly and his team does a good job. But there are also some other things that they do that are sometimes not helpful, and the journalists will come to that the journalists are repeating. Similar example, capital flows. I mean, often I'll see articles around capital flows where there's really no context or economic meaning, and in some cases just outright mistakes by journalists in interpreting what's going on. So, in general, there's kind of an absence of depth sometimes on some of these numbers. I know you're all working under deadlines, so it's easier just to, in a sense, copy and paste some of these things. But it's not the kind of journalism we need in the country. And then there's sometimes a disconnect in how are you linking it to the broader issues going on in the economy and the society on that. So, for example, to be specific about it, I mean, one, just reporting the GDP data the way it's given by the NBS is not really good business reporting. I mean, the NBS has already put out a press release with their official numbers. Your job is to go deeper and give some context, give some insight to the reader, to your audience for that. Second example, I mean, I see every day in the press, the market cap of the entire NSE has gone up 4 billion, 3 billion, 2 billion down. It's just a meaningless statistics. And again, I think it's just repeated to fill space in the pages, but isn't helping us. Inflation. I mean, when I've stood up on television, I've made the same points. We we have journalists, you have inflation. NBS puts out a number that says it's 12.58 over the last year versus 12.62 last month compared to the previous 12 months. To us, that's a completely meaningless statistic that too much is getting read into in our context with 4 significant digits. I'm not sure any other country actually publishes monthly inflation, so I'm not sure quite why Nigeria is repeating this. And as I said, the NBS makes it worse in our sense. While we're very positive on them, they often publish these things to 3, 4 significant digits. And in our context, where it's difficult to any country, but particularly in our context, where it's difficult to measure the numbers, to have something to 4 significant digits is just, to be quite frank, kind of meaningless. And the press has a role to not be repeating this problem. Next slide. So we've gone deeper on this to just show you some specific examples of the kinds of things we think that are kind of unhelpful on this. So, here's a headline from one of the printed press outlets here. Nigeria received $1.9 billion U.S. dollar capital inflow in Q2 2020, down by 78%, 6%. What does this mean? This was done during COVID. Capital inflows, is there a definition of that on that's proper? The relationship between foreign portfolio capital, between direct investment, foreign direct investment. There's also something in economics called a stock and flow problem. I think there's a lot of confusion on the capital inflows. I mean, there's some people at any point in time putting in a capital inflow. There's some people who are taking out their capital. Is there a net flow? The net flows obviously tend to be highly volatile on a quarterly basis, so they go up or down. 50%, 70%, that's quite possible. In this context, we have it in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, in which we had rapid economic contraction, and wasn't highlighted. That piece of context was not put into on that. But then the other problem is, the person said, the writer said, the latest figure reflects a negative trend in how dwindling inflows is a cause for worry to the Nigerian economy. Well, that's true, but that's really a meaningless statement. There's no insight, there's no context to that, there's no kind of real depth of explanation on that. And a similar statement is hope that subsequent quarters will attract more inflows as the government begins to open aspects of the economy. Again, a kind of meaningless statement. What would we like to see? What do we think would make the most difference to the country? One is the articles that are good have opinions from different experts and varied experts on them in short, concise statements by the people. Not too long. You have to fit in a few of these expert opinions on that. It should have what's going on, the external and internal impacts of this decline, how this trend relates to other macroeconomic indicators, so how it affects interest rates, how it affects capital market, among others, on that. And then, what does it imply for policy? What should the government be doing? Is this a one-off thing, just part of normal volatility? Is it a longer-term concern? The government should be reacting with policy. So we have an article that just repeats the statistics with no context and has meaningless statements, but we should have an article that has more value to the reader. Next slide. So this is an example of this. No tariff rise for poor and vulnerable Nigerians. NERC directs discos to embark on mass metering. It's obviously a very important story. It's just done a few days ago. All of these we just pulled out on this. So the problem we had here was what was stated was what the federal government said, and obviously that is fine. The federal government has put out a press release, or the president's spokesman has said something. But what it doesn't have on the right-hand side is, what's actually going on? What's the background to it? What was the implementation period? When was everyone expected to have a metering? And then specifically how it's actually affecting the bottom of the pyramid, or more generally across Nigerian society, this lack of metering. So some context for it on that. And then some analysis of what this policy means. So what's happened here is that the journalist has repeated what NERC what the federal government has said to well, NERC is the federal government and NERC together, but NERC directing the discos to do this. But what's the analysis of this? Is this implementable? Will it work? Are there going to be unintended consequences of it? Will it make the problem worse than we see? How bad is the problem? All of those things were left out because, in effect, all we were doing, this journalist was doing, was repeating the press release of the federal government or NERC. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an interesting story. We often get these around, the stock market, NSE, FMVQ on this. So 44.52% of total market volume traded on UAC shares, UAC of Nigeria shares today. Okay, so first, 44.52. What is the what does that mean actually? I mean, the number. It's just as I said, we have these meaningless efforts at precision on here. I guess this is a mathematical number. It's not meaningless like maybe some of the NBS statistics are, because this is, we know the denominator, we know the numerator. But I mean, the way this should be expressed is 45% total market volume. And again, they go on to say, 111.87 million units of shares traded, value 643.19 million on that. So then it makes the claim this is 45% of total market volume. Well, obviously, one share trading 45% of market volume. It may be interesting. It may not be interesting. But then we go on and we sort of add kind of more meaningless information. Volume traded represents 3.88% of UAC's shares. Compared to the previous day, the trend volume had increased by 2,095%. So what does that all mean? I mean, obviously, something's going on with UAC. To have the shares be 45% of the total volume by value trade on the NSE, it may be meaningful. Why would that happen? It would happen because something's going on at UAC. There has to be some announcement. There has to be some story. So what's the reason for it? So just repeating the statistics is completely unhelpful. And again, for example, and just the way numbers are expressed, this 2,095% thing, the percentages, the way they're used often in the business press is very poor. This is just simply say that today's trading volume of UAC was 20 times the normal trading volume. And you wouldn't compare it to a single day. You would compare it to the normal trading volume. But again, right now, this story has no value added to the reader on that. So what should we do? So, what the article should do is say, UAC had 20 times to its normal trading volume. Why is that the case? What's going on with the company? What's going on with the fundamentals? Why is this actually happening? What's the outlook for UAC? Did they issue some results? Did they issue some press release? Did they change their officers? There has to be some reason. And if there isn't a reason why it's 20 times, then the journalist should be asking, well, if there's no reason that it's 20 times, maybe there's something going on, insider trading or something. But right now, all we're doing is repeating some outlying market statistics without giving any kind of explanation or value add. Next slide, please. Okay, so then tracking, reporting the metrics that matter. I mean, one of the things that Taiwo said, and Delia and I reiterate here, you have such a critical role in society, and a big part of this role is keeping the focus on the issues that really, really matter to that, and relating what's happening on a day-to-day business in a day-to-day basis in the business and financial community to, what's going on in the big issues in the country. So, these are some of the metrics that we think that really matter. So, if you remember, it was in 2019, as President Buhari was coming into his second term, he made it very clear that his objective was to lift 100 million people out of poverty. So that gives you something to anchor a lot of business journalism around. I mean, is this metering policy going to help lift people out of poverty? Is this exchange rate policy going to lift people out of poverty? Is this FOIL policy going to lift people out of poverty? Is this intervention program by the CBN going to lift people out of poverty? So that metric now is out there for to use. The president himself has put it out, so you can hold the administration as accountable as you can to that metric. Trader money, enabling people with trader money. The government's come out and given a number. We have 20,000. I thought it was more, but whatever the number is, enabled young people with trader money. Is that happening? They've put out the program. They've put out the metric. They've put out the success of this. And you have the perfect right as journalists to hold them accountable. You said that you were going to lift this many people out of poverty, this many people participating in the program. The program doesn't have corruption. It's working properly. Is that actually the case? Infrastructure. So the government commits to invest in infrastructure. Here we've just used a placeholder of $100 million. Are the infrastructure projects going on? Which are the government's kind of got on this policy of really focusing on the major ones like the Niger Delta and the second Niger Bridge, the rail projects, etc. That's a place you can really kind of hold them accountable. You said there were 7 major projects you were doing. Have they started? What stage are they at? Are they within their budget? Who's doing the work? Are we importing Chinese workers? Are Nigerians getting jobs, etc.? So similar, just to your point 4 here, just in a general basis. I mean, one of the things that this government does, and for example, and my dear friend Ajuri, who just says a lot of the statements to young Ajuri, he's brilliant, right? But he comes out and says this program is working, etc. And is it? It's up to journalists to be able to dig in and actually kind of put out the information around that. Similarly, so that what it means, implication point 5 is, when these press releases come out from the MDAs extolling what the accomplishments are, it's your job not to just repeat the press release, but to come out with some value added on that and some deeper insight. So then, of course, you need to have some specialization where you followed an issue. So when a press release comes out, the issue is not cold for you. If you may be the one at the paper that understands the metering, you may be the one that understands the social program, you may be the one that understands the infrastructure. When the press release comes out, you can relate it back to the whole body of knowledge about that. So, and then, just the last point we wanted to make here was, we do see a lot of good reporting around security, and we see I don't comment on security. People who know me, so it's not my place on that. But for me as a Nigerian resident, very interested in this, I feel like I get good reporting on the security aspects. But I don't get, as someone writing the economy, I don't get the good reporting, the same level of reporting and holding the government accountable and getting the real story out there on the security. So next slide, please. One final thing I just wanted to put in my part of this session here. Just because if we're talking about metrics that matter, I mean, we have really pushed to do a lot more thinking around the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, part of the reason for this is if we don't have metrics that are consistent, it's very easy. It's very easy for anyone to be able to claim they're making progress, right? So, we have this program, it's done this. We have this program, it's done that. And if you look at the statement the government put out about 2 weeks ago on that, had a long list of accomplishments. But I think the press should be standing back and saying, actually, we have a set of metrics to really hold the government accountable at the overall level. And these are the Sustainable Development Goals. So we can understand things like no poverty. So is poverty going down or up in Nigeria? It doesn't matter how many trader money programs there are. If the number of people in poverty are going up, then the government is not accomplishing its objective of lifting 100 million people out of poverty. Zero hunger. So how many people are not eating enough in Nigeria? And is that number going up or down? Good health and well-being. How many people, what are the health outcomes, life expectancy, immunization rates, obesity, all of those numbers can be measured. Quality education. How many children are in school? How many are getting a proper education, etc. So you need a language that enables you to kind of track progress on these critical issues in Nigeria. And we're suggesting that the Sustainable Development Goals are that language. And it's happening not just in Nigeria, but around the world. And of course, the government itself has embraced this. We have a special advisor, the president on Sustainable Development Goals, a very good special advisor to His Excellency Governor Sanwo-Olu in Lagos on this. So there's a consistency. And if you use this language over time, I think you'll find it's a very effective way to try to hold the government accountable and to have a kind of consistent thread in your stories where you're giving more value added. Another program announced, but is it really helping poverty? Is it really helping clean water and sanitation? Is it really helping decent work and economic growth? So let me stop there. Let me just finish in saying again, I mean, we're doing this in the spirit of strengthening the press in Nigeria, the business and financial press. But we're really honored, as I said, to have you here. You play such a critical role in this society, in this country at this time. And it's, you've done so much good work. We just want to see the amount of good work and the consistency of the work go up there. So, and again, thank you. There's so many of you on this call I personally deal with, and I really appreciate your efforts on this. I know it's not easy right now, but it's just have courage and please continue to do what you do. So God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that very insightful and I think quite practical session, talking about, querying some of the information that we get, some of the how we can track and report, and ultimately hold the government accountable. So thank you very much. Our next topic now is journalism and the new normal, challenges and opportunities. To facilitate this session is someone who is, I would say, he's actively living the experience and reimagining the media and information industry. Tokunbo is the editor-in-chief, Sears Business, the media publication arm of Sears, where he uses his editorial experience to curate quality insights on the Nigerian economy and business environment. Prior to this, he was the economics editor at Sears Business for 3 years. Tokunbo is an economist who completed his BSc and MSc in economics at the University of Bristol and the London School of Economics. He also has prior experience in investment banking, specializing in liquidity risk management and treasury trading. Please welcome Mr. Tokunbo Afikuyomi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Delia. And a big shout out to PwC for opening.
It appears we have lost signal with Tokunbo.
I think he might be on mute.
Hi, apologies for that. I think I lost internet connection for a few seconds there.
Okay, great. We can hear you now, Tokunbo. Please go ahead.
Solid. Apologies. Okay. So, I was just saying that a big thank you to PwC for organizing this. I think events like this are very important. We usually have many workshops in different other sectors like banking and the likes, and I think it's just as important to have, these types of discussions in the media industry. And some of the things that Andrew has said are very important issues in the Nigerian media landscape. And I think even if you can't remember the individual case studies that have been mentioned, one thing to always keep in mind is to always be critical of not just the government and the information that comes out from the government, but also the information you also see from other media houses. I think it's important that whatever information you come across, to always have that critical eye and doing that independent thinking to then provide your own, context and your own insights from that information. Okay, so on to journalism and the new normal. So I'm going to go through specifically the impact of the pandemic on media and journalism. But what you will find is that there will be discussions of a general trend in media which, in my opinion, had already started before the pandemic, and the pandemic has just accelerated some of these trends that we have been seeing all the time. So let's kick off. Okay, so obviously the pandemic hit the world earlier this year, and there have been impacts felt across many sectors. Specifically in media, it's kind of been a mixed bag. So there has been good news and bad news. So what happened around March and April was that globally, a lot of media industries, including us at Steers, saw a big bump in readership. Now, what was happening there was, as the pandemic hit, consumers and our audience became hungry for information. Everybody was trying to figure out what exactly was going on. What is the coronavirus? And so on your screen, you see different headlines from different publishers. So The Guardian US released an article that actually explained that. I think I'm back. The Coronavirus Explainer on its website became the most read article ever on Guardian US. Now, that is evidence of, individuals looking for information during the pandemic. And also, we found, globally as well, media subscriptions saw a bump as well. So in the US, bumped by 63%, and in Europe, almost three times increases over there in subscription numbers. And then you also have some bad news, and it'll probably make sense to look at the bottom two to get the context of why the middle impacts we're seeing. So we found that advertising revenue started to really drop for media publishers, and that was a direct correlation with advertising spending by different businesses taking a hit. What usually tends to happen in bad times is advertising spend is usually one of the first budgets to get cut. And in the pandemic specifically, it made sense for businesses to stop advertising. There's no point of having a billboard on the streets anymore if people are locked up in their homes. Similarly, if you cannot purchase things at a retail store, it probably didn't make sense to advertise the products online as well. So businesses reduce advertising, and for a lot of publishers who rely on advertising revenue, that led to significant strains. So globally, publishers like The Atlantic had to lay off some workers, and in Nigeria, that was also felt. One media report said that close to 17 media houses are currently suffering from tight revenues and being unable to fulfill all salary payments, which I cannot confirm. I saw that online. And Punch also was forced to reduce the number of pages on its print magazine, and that is also as a result of the lockdowns led to less people being on the streets, and so less people were able to buy prints on the roads. Obviously, the fear of pandemic and being able to spread through items also hampered people buying newspapers from vendors. Now, the impact of the pandemic is not just financial to business publications or all publications rather, but it has also been there's also been a strain for journalists as well. Research has shown that journalists are now facing increased anxiety and stress as a result of a few different things. Now, this normally tends to happen during, as I said, bad times, be it recession or even wars, where journalists have that duty to continue to report what is happening, no matter how positive or negative the story is. And so that continued reporting of negative stories does have a hit or have an impact on, the individual journalist, and having to travel to, dangerous places as well is something that does impact the mental health of a journalist. So that's something to make sure that you are aware to, and you are taking that time taking that time off wherever you can to recoup. There's also an increased fear of misreporting. Obviously, the coronavirus, in many respects to most people was entirely new. And so there's a fear, that the journalists would have of misreporting or, not getting the right information because by definition, the novel virus, not much information was known before it. And that also led to journalists having to significantly increase their knowledge on a new beat. Now, I don't know how many journalists were health experts before, but essentially since the pandemic hit, many of you would have had to almost become that. I personally, I still write at least one article a week, and in the height of the pandemic, I had to make sure that I was increasing my knowledge and boosting my knowledge on the coronavirus. Reading different reports and research on, vaccines and how the science of lockdown and all of this information I had to quickly receive and digest so that I could report and provide insights to our readers as steers. So that's something that, caused a lot of stress for many journalists, having to quickly learn a new beat. And then there's also been, according to research, an uptick in the amount of hours that journalists are doing. The nature of the job is quite a 24/7 job in many respects. And working at home makes that worse because there's now a blurred line between work and life, or work and play. There's that active activity of getting up and leaving the office doesn't really happen anymore. The office and the home is not the same. And so what we found globally is that 63% of journalists have said that they're now working longer hours. And even in my experience in our newsroom as well, I have noticed that. And so, I've had to make sure people are taking leave to kind of counteract that effect. Now, another thing that usually happens in a time of crisis is misinformation. Now, with a disease or a virus, it becomes a bigger problem because this misinformation can lead to death and has done in this pandemic, and was also the case in previous other epidemics or pandemics. We had cases with Ebola, and with coronavirus, we're seeing that as well. Within days of the coronavirus landing in Nigeria, there were already cures according to WhatsApp, cures in quotes according to WhatsApp, drink lemon water, and, I saw, many different stories that I didn't want to put on here, of, that people were trying to do to themselves to cure themselves of the virus, which just wasn't true. And so that misinformation creates a lot of noise, or has created a lot of noise in the media landscape, because it's not just WhatsApp. Because of social media, it also gets consumed by consumers as well through other channels. And so as a media publication, as journalists, there's a heightened role of making sure that, one, you're not falling into the trap of misinformation, but you're also helping readers guide to information that is happening. Another thing we found that has happened since the pandemic is a rise in data journalism. And this was very much happening before, but it heightened during the pandemic. So the idea that you needed to use text to relay your story or information is not always the most optimal way of doing that. And so during the pandemic, many publishers and many journalists stepped into that role of providing information using visualization. So on the left is Bloomberg's coronavirus map that was basically tracking the number of cases, number of deaths worldwide, and showed how Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Tokumbo, we can hear you now.
Apologies, I'm not quite sure what's going on. My internet is usually very, very stable. Okay, sorry, I'm not sure where I left. Was I on this slide already?
Yes, you were.
Okay, cool. So,
Tokumbo, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can.
Okay, please go ahead.
Apologies again. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, so on the right-hand side is a policy response index by state. So now it was possible to write many articles explaining how different states have responded to the pandemic. But consumers can also get that information through a very quick visualization. And that's what we started to see more of during the pandemic. In fact, the lead data journalist at the FT essentially became a superstar on social media due to the many visualizations that he was creating to provide information on the pandemic. So that's something we started to see more of during the coronavirus. And like I said, it was something that was already picking up before the pandemic, but the pandemic accelerated that hunger. Okay. Next slide. And the next one, please. So now we're going to talk about consumers. All right. So this is something that has been the theme of this talk, that has already been happening, but with the pandemic increased. Now, what we found globally is that more and more people are receiving their information through, online publications or through social media, and this is happening very, very quickly. In fact, if you look at the graph on the right, that is a particular case in Germany where, as early, only just 7 years ago, 63% of people were reporting that they were using print to receive their information. By January 2020, 7 years, that number had reduced to 33%. And that's something that we're seeing globally. And so the way that consumers are getting their information is changing very, very quickly. And so as a journalist or as a media publication, you have to adapt to that, especially the point around social media. More and more people using social media to get information is something that we cannot ignore because it has impacts on how we as journalists produce our information and who we're competing against. Okay, next slide. So yeah, I just wanted to also show how these trends have also been changing in Nigeria specifically. So this is looking at it's an estimate of daily newspaper copies that are sold in Nigeria. In the 80s, around 600,000, reached a peak of around 1 million a day in the 90s, and is now dropping quite significantly. And again, this is research from Business Day showing the most frequent channel for consumers to get news. As you can see there, print newspapers around 4%, whereas online and social media are the biggest channels that are used according to this research. So I guess what does this all mean, and what are the implications and opportunities for publications and journalists? What the pandemic and these trends have forced a lot of publishers to do is essentially go back to the drawing board. We have to take a step back and rethink and go back to what the objective of and the mission of the publication, and as your role as a journalist, what exactly is the value that you're providing to your readers. We need to go back to those basics and fundamentals so that we make sure that we're adding value add in this difficult time. Only with that can a publication or a journalist succeed. We need to find what is unique about our individual missions and push those agendas. Because up until this point, it has been very much it's always been machine-like, day to day, getting that content out very quickly. And I do sympathize with many journalists in Nigeria because I know and I'm very aware of how tough many newsrooms operate in terms of making sure that a specific amount of content is produced on a daily basis. And that pressure, makes it even more difficult to find, to spend that time to find insights. But it's something that has to be done to make sure that that value add is being provided in these times. And so on the right is a sponsored post by the Wall Street Journal, uncertain times call for trusted facts. Now consumers more and more in Nigeria, as we're becoming a more developed nation and, becoming more educated, are looking for journalists that they can trust. They want journalists that are experts on particular issues. Now, I think we need to start moving away of having, a generalist approach to journalism. I tell my newsroom a lot of times, if you're covering a beat, say, energy or telecoms or banking or sports or fashion, you need to make sure that you are operating at a level that is as high as the people who call themselves experts in these sectors. So if you're covering a sector like banking, you want to make sure that your research and the level of knowledge that you're building is on par with what, say, a banking analyst in an institution, in an institution is also doing. The only difference is that whilst that analyst might be producing reports, what you are doing as a journalist is more along the lines of storytelling and informing the public. At the foundation, though, the level of expertise that you need to be working on should be just as high. Of course, it's easier said than done, but because of how the world has become and information is so vast online, it's not impossible. You can become an expert on an issue without having to go to university to learn those skills. And it's also something that can be done on the job. When my journalists talk to sources or when there's a story, a lot of times they call people not even to get a quote or to get a source, for a particular story. They're calling people just to get extra understanding, the context, the background, the insights that Andrew was talking about earlier. They're making those calls to boost their understanding, not just to get a quote. And so that is something that, I very much believe that journalists need to do more of. Thinking more about the foundational skills that they are increasing and picking a subject matter that they want to become an expert on. Because only with that can you help readers separate the noise from the real value. And so that's something that we should all be working on trying to improve. Consumers are now also wanting journalists that can write really well. It's not just about, as Andrew was saying, copy-pasting, text from, a press release or from another media publication and spitting it out. It's more, readers want to enjoy the process of reading. As a journalist, it's you and the reader, and you need to make sure that you're providing the information in a very enjoyable and accessible manner. Your readers need to understand what it is you are saying. And first of all, you need to understand the subject for you to be able to do that. But then you also need to be able to write it in a way that's accessible. In writing, you have to separate the process of clarity of thought and clarity of expression. You make sure when you get a story, you solve the clarity of thought first. You understand exactly what is happening. You understand the story. You speak to the right people. You do the right research. Clarity of thought, box ticked. And then you work on the clarity of expression. Given my understanding of this, how can I express this story in a way that's accessible to my readers? More and more, that is what would make you unique in your space. I'll just come back to the point on social media. I think it's something that in Nigeria we need to also wake up to. The fact of the matter is that Twitter is becoming it is the number one news app for many people now. That is how most people get their news. Previous generations will pick particular publishers that they will read on print, but now more and more people are just getting their information from Twitter. And so there's almost now no need to read an article to get breaking news. the president, all the ministries, they tweet out information, instantly. And, readers get that, by the second. And so trying to compete with Twitter and breaking news, faster than social media can, is almost a losing battle. And again, this research is also from Business Day, that's showing that more people using, Twitter to keep up with breaking news than even entertainment value, right? I think that's something that's quite significant. And so when you're thinking of who you're competing against, it's not necessarily just, the next publisher, but social media, Twitter in itself is also something that is becoming a very big player as far as news is concerned. In fact, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, they as well are also becoming very, very big in the space of news reporting. Something like Instablog Nigeria on Instagram is, one example of that. So I guess just to wrap up with some key takes, given the pandemic and also given the trends that we have seen over time, is again that point of not trying to compete with Twitter. I think, the second point about there are no awards for being first to publish. We're seeing, many accolades being given these days by Nigerian journalists to the likes of Kiki Mordi. That prize was not provided, because she was the first to publish, the sex issues that happen in Nigeria. Many publishers and journalists have reported on that. But it was the quality and depth and the investigation, the unlocking that she was able to do in a very accessible manner, that earned, the deserved accolades that she is now receiving. The awards come for the depth, not for the speed. And, making sure that you're seeking training, you need to make sure that you're constantly upskilling yourself. If not through your media house, then, using websites, using people, using your sources, not just for quoting, but also for understanding. Making sure that you're doing thorough research to become an expert. Some of the things that Andrew mentioned in his talk around how to use inflation numbers and why, the MBS does something like, 12.58% doesn't really make sense, does not come natural to people. And so it's something that you need to make sure that you're asking, why is it the case that this number is not the right one to use? Or making sure that you're going online to Google, what does the inflation rate actually mean? There are many websites that give you that context. And it's with that understanding that allows you to provide insights for your readers. You need to make sure that you're combining this research that you conduct with good storytelling. If you want to become unique in this space, making sure you're combining research and storytelling is key. We're seeing, journalists popping up in different beats because they are combining this skill of becoming an expert, thorough research, and storytelling. Someone like Joey Akan, for example, in sports, is doing that. So it's about finding your own way of becoming more unique, and these are ways of reaching that. You have to find your own writing style or angle. It's not just about, if everybody is talking about a particular issue with only one lens, it becomes a bit boring. What more does yours add to that? You need to make sure you find your own angle. What aren't people saying about the GDP numbers? What aren't people saying about the electricity tariff? Finding those angles, is what will make you unique. And finding different writing styles as well. There isn't just one way to write an article. There are many different ways, from a first person, second person, using numbers. There are many different ways of writing a particular piece, and making sure that you're trying to become unique and being innovative in doing that is very key to making sure that you stand out. And the reason why it's very important to make sure that you're standing out and being unique is because, as we saw at the beginning of this presentation, advertising revenues is falling. And so what many publishers are going to start doing as a result is moving their clients from advertisers to the readers themselves. We're already seeing, quite a few publications switching from advertising revenue to subscription revenue, where you're asking the reader to pay for your content. The reader is not going to pay for your content if the reader does not believe that they are getting something different or unique from that story or the stories that you produce. If what I'm getting from, your reporting, I can get easily from Twitter, as a consumer, I don't see why I should pay for that. And that's why these points I'm making about becoming an expert in a beat or finding a unique writing style is important, because that is how you then say, you can pay for my content because I do this differently, because I provide you these insights that nobody else is providing you with. And also the fact that we're becoming more digital, I think it only makes sense to use that to your advantage. The internet, social media, all of those things can be used to your advantage. And stuff around using infographics and data journalism, you can use websites that can help you draw graphs very quickly and allow you to provide the same information in a more accessible way for your readers. And I think this is something that we can do more of in Nigeria in terms of providing information to our audience. I know people like Budget are quite big on this as well. I remember back in 2015, during the elections, Scared Business was thinking of doing some coverage on the elections, and we had a few options, and one of those options was to do the bog standard, creating many articles that will cover the different results and the different insights from the elections. But what we actually ended up doing was we created a election center that basically was a map that visualized election results across Nigeria, House of Rep, governor, all the way to presidential results. And the amount of traffic we received on that was 100 times more than we've ever gotten on any of the articles we produced. And it was just an example to us that there are easier ways to get information across. It's not always going to be an article. You can do that through visualizations that consumers are also quite hungry for, because it helps them consume that information in a more in an easier manner. And yeah, just to end, I mean, if there's anything to take from, I guess, these slides, and I think it will be this. Find your beats. I think try and not be too general. You don't want to be, it's good to have broad knowledge about things that are happening in Nigeria, but also find your niche. What is it that people call you for? What is it that the audience would, ask you to provide them because they know that you know it better than most other people? Finding your beat, excelling in it, that is how you can start to create a unique voice for yourself as a journalist in the media landscape. And with that, I will end. Apologies for all the internet issues, but we got there in the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tokumbo, and no problems at all. I mean, we're living in this particular age now, and infrastructure obviously is part of what we're dealing with. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed reading your articles in Fair Business. So kudos to you and your team for the work that you're doing in terms of data quality, depth of investigation, storytelling, and innovation. One of the things that stood out for me was the fact that you said consumers want journalists they can trust, experts on issues, separate the noise, and people who can write well. And this, for us at PwC, is really one of the reasons why we started the capability and enhancement workshops in our Media Excellence Award. So thank you so much. And on that note, I would like to introduce our final topic for today. It's one that has been trending for quite a while and generating a lot of discussion. To help us demystify CAMA, I will invite Taiwo Ebele, but I will first of all read his bio. Taiwo, although you're all familiar with him, he's the author of Insights on Taxation and Fiscal Policy. Top 50 Tax Issues in Nigeria, the Nigeria Transfer Pricing chapter of the IBFD publication, and a contributor to the annual Doing Business report of the World Bank. He is a prominent speaker at conferences and a regular guest on various business and economy programs on TV, radio, and online media. Taiwo is an alumnus of the London School of Economics, Yale University, and Harvard Kennedy School. He is the founder and president of Impact Africa Foundation. Please welcome Taiwo Oyede.
Thank you very much, Didia. So I'll go straight into my presentation. I think now I can share my screen. Okay, Didia, do you confirm that you can see it?
Yes. Not just
okay.
yet. Hold on. Yes, now we can see it.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Didia. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Tokumbo and Andrew. I found those sessions very, very useful, particularly, the point about clarity of thought and then clarity of expression. For many of us who are not journalists and we write, these are things you have to always bear in mind. If you can't think straight, it's very unlikely you'll be able to express yourself clearly. And therefore, if you're unable to express yourself clearly, then you fail in communicating. I know the topic I have is a heavy one. If you give us a whole day, we will not finish CAMA and issues to do with ease of doing business and competitiveness. But I'll do the best I can in the 20 minutes that have been allocated. So my outline is to give an overview and context, and then I'll move quickly into looking at the major provisions and what's different between the old CAMA, let me call it the old CAMA, and then the new CAMA. And then after that, I'll be looking at how do we connect the dots. And I think connecting the dots is even more important for journalists because, like Andrew said, it's not just about putting out there something that someone has said. You create a lot more value, more insight, and more impact when you can interpret and connect the dots. So that way, because the average person out there does not connect the dots, so we need the media, we need the press, we need journalists to help us do that on a massive scale and consistently so. Then I'll close by sharing my concluding thoughts and what I consider to be the next steps. So first, interestingly, this has been a major issue in Nigeria in the past couple of weeks. In terms of its significance, the CAMA is Nigeria's most important business legislation. And if it's of interest to you, it's also important to know that it's actually the single biggest piece of legislation in Nigeria. So it's bigger than any other law, which is why you then find a lot of people haven't even read because it's not easy to read. A large document like that, over 600 pages. You also find that also, some people who have read haven't read well, and then they're making comments, and some of them are angry, and not because they fully understand what they have read. And in terms of, the evolution, the old CAMA, was enacted in 1990, and not much has been done in terms of, modifying it, amendments to make it more useful, more contemporary for almost 30 years. So it's been a long time coming. So this new enactment should have been 25 years ago, should have been 29 years ago, but the second best time is now. And I think it's important to clarify that this is a re-enactment. So the old law was repealed and a new law was reenacted. And this is important because I noticed that even the government of Nigeria on their handle were calling it an amendment. It's not an amendment, it's a reenactment. In terms of the scope and relevance of the law, It covers legal entity formations, issues to do with how do you manage and operate your entities, issues to do with dissolution of businesses, as well as unincorporated business names, for example, but also in terms of trustees, associations, religious bodies, and so on and so forth. It has significant impact on doing business, Nigeria's competitiveness, and our ability to attract investment, both domestic and foreign investment. There were some reports yesterday saying that Nigerians have around 36 trillion naira in bank accounts and in low-yielding assets. So while many Nigerians are poor, there's also a lot of money in circulation that is looking for attractive investment, which means if you create the right environment, maybe half of that 36 trillion naira we have in Nigeria today goes into productive investment. You can imagine the enormity of growth economically, of employment, and all of that we can create with those kind of money. Various laws, regulations, and guidelines complement the CAMA. So CAMA is not a standalone law that does everything all by itself. So there has been the media frenzy, of course, following the signing of the 2020 CAMA into law by the president. Officially, this law has not been gazetted, so to be honest, Nigerians haven't seen it in quotes. Because we're only just told by the president that he signed, has not been officially published. The version we have, that all of us have seen, are the ones shared by some people at the presidency, also at the National Assembly's website, and so on and so forth. So some of the headlines in the newspapers that stood out for me, or in the media, because not only newspapers, include the one by this day. Our National Assembly says CAMA law will ensure corporate accountability and ease of doing business. So that's positive. And then Sarah threatens to sue Buhari, so we'll take legal action for XYZ reason. And then the cable says CAMA 2020, the good and not so good provisions you should know. And who is afraid of the law of CAMA? And the lawyers, I think is one lawyer here, drags Nigerian government to court, wants controversial CAMA law reviewed. And that's important. Of course, there's so many other headlines. But let's try and look into the details in the very short time that we have. What are the major provisions? First and foremost, I would like to say that the CAMA has 870 sections compared to 613 in the old CAMA. That's about almost 260 more. It's divided into three parts. Part A deals with the composition of the Corporate Affairs Commission. Part B provides for incorporation of companies. Part C deals with limited liability partnership. Part D provides for limited partnership. Part E covers the registration of business names. And Part F guides the registration of incorporated trustees. And Part G deals with general provision and the establishment of an administrative proceeding committee for the CAC. If we now go into more specific amendments, and please don't take this summary as everything that CAMA says. Like I said, I can easily give you maybe 20 slides of what you have on the screen, but I only have one. So what I've done is just to highlight those that I consider to be the most significant changes for our conversation today. So on the list of doing business, we have administration arrangement to rescue a company. So before, you set up a company, you operate it, and if things don't go the way you want, or business is just too difficult, or it's the objective, you go into liquidation. There was almost like, it's almost like saying, if you give birth to a baby, you expect the baby to grow up, and if they are sick, you just allow them die. Why don't we consider taking the person to a hospital. So we take care of them. So we didn't have that in our law before. So now we have it. So rescue provision means if you are sick, we shouldn't have to allow you to die. We see whether we can rescue you. And even if that entity has to die, can it die a decent way of dying? Can you get more from the assets to settle some of the creditors? Then we have electronic applications and filing of documents and returns with the CAC and virtual meetings, particularly with coronavirus now. This is really important. So you don't have to be physically in one location to have your meetings. And then the common seal that companies need to have, and this is something you have to impress on a document. It's so outdated and old school in its nature and relevance. A lot of the documents we generate today are not physical. So therefore, it's interesting and maybe also to say commendable. It should have happened a long time ago, that common seal is no longer compulsory. So we also have more legal entities have been provided for in the new CAMA, including limited liability partnership. We didn't have that before. So you see LLP in many countries. We didn't used to have it in Nigeria, apart from maybe Lagos state law. Reduction of fees for filing and registration of changes to whatever you file with the CAC. Then in terms of private and small businesses, and I need to make a distinction between private companies and small businesses. So a private company is a company with less than 50 shareholders. You should have a few people. So, and you're not into anything that is of public interest, and not taking money from the public. You're not a bank, for example. But whereas a small company or a small company is defined, is by definition, it's not about number of shareholders only. So based on the new CAMA, if your turnover is less than 120 million naira in a year, or your net asset is less than 60 million naira in a year, then you are considered to be a small company. Before now, what the position was that we use 2 million for your turnover and then 1 million for your net assets. For small companies, you do not have to have an AGM. Why? Because now you can have a single shareholder owning a company. Before, you needed a minimum of 2. So if you are the only one who owns your business as a single shareholder, you cannot be meeting with yourself. So it's just common sense that AGM is not mandatory. You can also have a single director as a small business, and it's optional for you to do audit, statutory audit, and the appointment of secretary is also optional for small companies. In terms of public companies, we have provisions like netting under section 718, and this netting is actually a very good one. We have it in a lot of developed countries. It allows for you to have things like futures and derivatives, which you can then trade in the capital market. Because it gives a confidence to the participant that if anything happens in terms of your position, we can net it off against your asset in other areas. So that way, I'm confident to transact with you. Some of the challenges we're having with the exchange rate of Naira, if we have a very matured market for futures, you see a lot of people who are trying to buy dollars don't need it immediately, but they're buying to keep for when they will need it. Imagine that we have a market that is very vibrant where I can buy dollars that I need in 3 years' time today and agree the amount. That the pressure that we have of the little FX today will be reduced. There's a disclosure of beneficial ownership of companies and persons with significant control. So this is important for transparency. So all manners of people set up different companies to do different things, and you don't know who they are. So this requires now that we disclose who the beneficial owners are. And bearer shares are prohibited. You cannot issue shares and say to whom it may concern, or whoever carries the certificate is the shareholder of the shares. No, you can't say that, because that means we then don't know who the person is, as it can easily be moved around. No director can act as CEO and chairman of a public company. So this is almost also replicating what we have in the Code of Corporate Governance issued by the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. And you cannot have multiple directorship in public companies, more than 5 of them. And a public company must display their accounts on their website, and they must have at least 3 independent directors. Again, this is also in the Code of Corporate Governance. For incorporated trustees, this is where you find associations, religious bodies, research organizations, or whatever it is that's of public interest, including sports, for example. The General of the Federation needs to give consent if you want to register a company that's limited by guarantee. So this is different from incorporated trustee. But if you don't get that consent and there's no response within 30 days, I like this provision. It says you have a default approval. We assume that your request has been approved, because otherwise some of these procedures can take forever. For incorporated trustees, the commission, which is the CAC, has been given the power to appoint interim managers, and even after their investigation, they have the power to replace trustees. And this is one of the areas where churches and organizations such as SERAP have said, no, it's not possible. And you see some of the organizations, some of the churches, and maybe can say, you know, government, you cannot control us. So my view is that government is not trying to control these organizations. They are trying to regulate. There's a difference between regulation and control. And why would government come and say they want to regulate? Because it's important. They are public organizations. A lot of them take contributions from members of the public. So you have provisions in terms of how do you prepare your accounts, what is it that you can do. For example, you can't just wake up and pay your trustee any amount that you want. You know, so payment is controlled. The commission will not take over for a church, for example, remove the pastor. So that's not part of the powers that CAMA has granted to them. So the pastor will continue to preach. It's just about the trustees and the management of the organization. So some of us think that instead of just saying no, we should focus on how do we build safeguards so that these provisions are not abused. Registration, it's important to note that registration under Part C as incorporated trustee is not mandatory. So you can even start your own association, or a church, or a mosque, or whatever it is, and decide not to register. It's not illegal. It just means that you not get a protection provided under the law. The new regulations generally align with global best practice, but we need clear implementation guidelines and safeguards to prevent abuse. I have to say, and we all know these very well, that some of these misgivings are a consequence of the lack of trust between the people and the government, because people have every reason to doubt the genuine intention of government. But this trust is something we have to build over time. Maintaining the status quo will not get us to where we want to be as a country. So I will then quickly see if I can just wrap up now. So finally, it's connecting the dots. So how do we connect the dots with CAMA and everything that has been said? One is to look at competitiveness and instead of doing business ranking. So the competitiveness ranking is done by the World Economic Forum, and this of business is done by the World Bank. They've suspended it for a couple of months for this year. So for the competitiveness ranking, the latest one was 2019. Nigeria was ranked 116 out of 141 countries. And you can see to the left of the screen our neighbors. So I call them our neighbors because there are people who rank a little better than us and a little worse than Nigeria. This is not really the class we want to belong to be honest. Because these rankings are considered not competitive. So what does the World Economic Forum look at? Institutions, quality of institution, infrastructure, macroeconomic environment, health and primary education, higher education and training, goods market efficiency, labor market efficiency, financial market development, technological readiness, market size, business sophistication, and innovation. So how many of these would CAMA 2020 address? Very few. If you look at to the right of the screen in terms of ease of doing business, so Nigeria is currently ranked 131 out of 190 economies. What does the World Bank consider? 1, starting a business, employing workers, dealing with construction permits, getting electricity, registering property, getting credits, protecting minority investors, paying taxes, trading across borders, contracting with government, enforcing contracts, and resolving insolvency. So how many of these does CAMA 2020 address? About 3 of them. So CAMA clearly addresses issues of starting a business. That's a huge improvement. It addresses protecting minority interests. In a large part of the amendment, it is provisions protecting minority interests and minority investors. And it also addresses issues about resolving insolvency. Not a lot about the other aspect. So what that means is overall, CAMA 2020 is good for improving our ease of doing business, but for us to really be classified as a country where it is easy to do business. By the way, the classification is very easy for those who are like top 50. And then you have easy for those who are around top 100, and the rest of it is not easy. So it's still not easy for us to do business in Nigeria. Again, connecting the dots, what else do we need to do? We need to first think about implementation guidelines for this new CAMA. It's a very humongous piece of legislation. A lot of work needs to go into the implementation. Then we need sub-national and agencies coordination. So if you make it easier to do business by registering with CAC, but then your local government, every time you open your door to do your small business, all manners of people show up to close it, shut it down, tell you about advertisements, about banners, about levies and charges. They still can't do business. And that's nothing to do with CAMA, right? So we need to have that coordination with sub-national. And also you have sometimes some agencies of government think that they're a government to themselves. So NIPOS just woke up one day and said, well, people should pay 20 million to register to do logistics, without even thinking about how does this affect other policies of government. Then we need to remove artificial barriers to doing business. Some of that include overregulation. You start a small business today, some of it is you are barely just surviving. I call it subsistence entrepreneurship. And then the list of regulations of compliance and permits is endless. How does anyone cope in such an environment? Then you have multiplicity of taxes, levies, and charges. So officially in Nigeria today, we have over 60 different taxes or tax heads, unofficially more than 200. Whereas 99% of the money we make from tax revenue comes from about 5 taxes. And it's the same thing around the world. So why do you have over 200 when only about 5 are really giving you the revenue you need? Why not just repeal the rest of it, harmonize, let people have clarity, let the number of taxes be few, and then that way enforcement and compliance would even be better. And we also need to address access to affordable credit. Doing business can never be easy if you can't even raise the money to fund your business, as well as capacity and management skills. Many entrepreneurs, so there's a report, I think also by the World Economic Forum, that says Nigeria is number 1 in the world in terms of the percentage of our adult population that are into entrepreneurship. But guess what? So some data says over 40 million. But many of them don't even survive the first year of business. So the business will go down, they struggle and start another one again. So some of these reasons are what I've mentioned, but also the inability for them to manage those businesses efficiently. Some can't even prepare accounts. And of course, infrastructure and institutions, very, very important for us to improve the use of business. So in conclusion, I have said the next steps, if I put it all together, is 1 is CAMA completion. Let's complete the law and gazette it in line with the Authentication Act, because if you have not gazetted it, it is not a law yet. And then we need to indicate a commencement date when the law is being gazetted. And that commencement date has to take into consideration transition arrangements. If you take the Finance Act that was gazetted at the beginning of the year, we had not talked about transition arrangements. We just gazetted it and it became effective when the president signed. So then everybody started scrambling. How do I do it? I've sold my goods, for the past 1 month, charging VAT at 5%. Now the loss is 7.5%. Am I supposed to go and call all my customers to come back and pay the balance of VAT? So we shouldn't make those kind of mistakes with this very important legislation. Then of course there's public education. So the CAC, Ministry of Industry and Trade, Presidency, everybody and all stakeholders, including the private sector, need to educate our people about the CAMA. Then capacity for implementation, we need to build this capacity, starting with the Corporate Affairs Commission itself, to other agencies of government like the Stock Exchange, Ministry of Industry, professional bodies, judiciary, because they're going to be adjudicating on these matters, as well as the media. One of the important points to make around the, frenzy on churches and NGOs regulation is the fact that the powers of the commission under this new CAMA are to be exercised by the board that will be created for the CAC. And this board has a lot of private sector participation, including representative of the Nigerian Bar Association, of the Professional Accounting Institutes, ICANN and ANAN, Institute of Secretaries. It also has NASIMA. It has NASME. So, in fact, NASME has been introduced. There wasn't NASME as a member before. And NASME is the National Association of Small and Medium Scale Enterprises. So they also now represent, which means some of those decisions are not the decisions of the Registrar General, just waking up from the wrong side of the bed suddenly. It will be the board making that decision, which I think is good for governance. And even the provision that people were, debating, interestingly, this provision on trustees has been in the draft CAMA since 2018. It was passed by the 8th National Assembly. It wasn't signed by the president. It was represented and passed again, and now it's been signed. So it wasn't like this was small good in at the last minute. So then, to conclude my presentation, we need complementary reforms, harmonize other inconsistent regulations. For example, in the Companies Income Tax Act, it still requires that all companies must file their tax returns with audited financial statements. Whereas this CAMA is saying if you're a small business or small company, you don't need audited accounts. So the question is, if I'm a small business and I want to file my returns, do I still need to do an audit just for the purpose of filing tax returns, even though CAMA says I shouldn't worry about that? Provide an enabling environment for businesses, collaborate with private sector and sub-national, and so on and so forth, including the international community. And finally, continuous improvement. Don't wait another 30 years for the next review. We should continuously engage with stakeholders and constantly review this law, if possible, every single year. And we need to consider global best practices. What is it that will get us to the top, or let's say like top 50 in the world, both on competitiveness and the ease of doing business. We should aim to be one of the best in the world, not just comparing where we are today with where we used to be in the previous years. And that doesn't get us far. And my closing quote is this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, one of my favorite people. Is a nation's culture resides in the heart and in the soul of its people. So which means all of this is about not just the law, it's about how we implement it and how we all own it. So we continue to improve on it, so overall things get better. So thank you very much for paying attention to me. I'll now yield back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Taiwo. Taiwo has just distilled a 600-page document into a few slides on some key provisions of CAMA. And it is quite clear that there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in educating the public, which is where you, the media, come in. So thank you so much to all our facilitators as well. Before we start the Q&A session, we're going to take a quick break to show a video, which I hope you will find entertaining. You will all agree that 2020 has been quite an interesting year, to put it mildly. We hope that things get better, obviously. Thank you so much and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'm sure you'll have your conclusions about whether we should cancel 2020. Before we get into the Q&A session, we've got questions coming in already. Please continue to put in your questions if you haven't already. The recording will be shared with all participants after a couple of days. So that will be shared with all who participated. I will start my first question with Andrew. Andrew, GDP is often at the center of discussions around economic indices, but some have said it is not the best indicator of how well an economy is doing. What are your thoughts on the measurement using Human Development Index, and how can reporters track and report this? Okay, I'm not sure Andrew is with us. He'll catch up with us. Let me direct this to Taiwo. Taiwo, can journalists be provided with tech tools to use in tracking the metrics that matter?
Okay, so that I'm sure that the person who has the question means PwC, right? So we are open to discussing how to, make that possible, because the objective is clear for us. We want to support what journalists are doing in delivering their work within our own capacity. So we'll look within our network. It's even possible that we have some tools that we can share. But let's take that conversation forward offline.
Okay, thank you, Taiwo. Is Andrew back with us?
Hi, it's Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, no, I think on this issue of metrics, I think there is a groundswell globally to kind of move beyond GDP. I think people are, while the issues have been apparent with it for a long time, it takes a while for people's lens to change. Some of the issues with GDP it doesn't really reflect well-being. If there's a high income distribution, and then what does it matter if unequal income distribution? You can have non-inclusive growth. So if you go back to the period in Nigeria from 2005 to 2014, say excluding 2004, excluding the crash, there was high GDP growth, but it wasn't spread throughout society. And also you can have GDP that's simply unproductive or actually hurts. Production of weapons doesn't necessarily improve human well-being. You can have bad health outcomes even at a high GDP. So I think the movement off of GDP is gathering momentum around the world. I think for our society in Nigeria, the Human Development Index is interesting, but it's only 3 numbers, and it seems like a little bit of a crude measurement in our view. That's why we've kind of said that there's going to be an emergence of the Sustainable Development Goal. And I also think, in our view, there's going to be a movement away from a single number. So to give you an analogy, if you were driving a car, and you were making a long trip, you'd like to have one number which tells you how much foil you have in the car, and you'd like another number which tells you what what your speed is. But combining those numbers, creating an index, we're obsessed with creating these indices, is not actually helpful in that context. So I think what we're advocating is to build on the momentum of the Sustainable Development Goals and have a more nuanced set of numbers, like a dashboard, if you will, for for leaders in the society to see where they're going. But we would really like to see GDP de-emphasized as a measure, because the relationship between GDP and well-being of people in Nigeria is not strong. So it's really an unhelpful measurement.
Thank you, Andrew. I will ask Tokumbo this. Tokumbo, you talked about finding your beat and excelling in it. The question is, what if you work in a media house that constantly moves a reporter around on different beats? How does one manage this?
Hi, okay, yeah, it's a very good question. I think what I would do is I would actually talk to your editor. Your editor should be, very keen to improve your own development, and if you can communicate to that person that whilst you're being moved around, you also want to have that space where you are able to develop your expertise in a certain area that you find most interesting. Now, if that also can't happen, I'm also quite a believer in mixing a particular subject within different spaces. For example, you can use a particular lens to cover, if you're someone that's very interested in tech, for example, you can use tech to cover any beat that you're on. So you can use tech to cover sports, you can use tech to cover, banking, fintech, you can use tech to cover, telcos. So it might not be a specific sector per se, but you might have a theme that you can develop an expertise on, but use that theme and that lens to cover the different beats that you are currently being moved around. And then you can start to build a reputation within that theme or that lens that people start to know you for being able to do, no matter the subject matter. So yeah, it'll be a combination of that, and also definitely talking to your editor that you have that desire to build your expertise in a certain area, and wherever there's time, I'm sure they will be able to provide you with any support and additional time to do that. But I think even if the answer is no from there, you can find particular themes that you always use to cover a particular subject matter that can give you that uniqueness. And even if you can't do it via that, you can also find other ways to build that expertise, maybe even in a type of writing or writing style that you do that people start to know you for. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. Saiwo, this question says, don't you think the business environment would still record significant successes if the one in place was implemented thoroughly?
Yeah, I don't think so. There are just some very significant limitations in the old CAMA that you cannot address by simply implementing it diligently. For example, you cannot incorporate a company with one shareholder. So I can start a business today and just call it, Go Better Enterprises. I don't need any other person to join me to start that business. So we therefore complain in Nigeria that there's a lot of informal sector businesses, some of them operating under the radar, they are not formalizing their business. It's because you can't start a company yourself without another person. So this new law says you cannot have a single shareholder. You have issues to do with, and at PwC, we support companies, in terms of how they operate and complying with regulations. And sometimes you want to file returns with the CAC, and the director is in Spain or the US, and CAC will say you have to sign physically. So you have to DHL the document to someone in fact, there was one we DHL the document to someone in India, and they signed. It got to CAC and they said the signature was irregular. So we had to send it again, and then they signed and sent back. So now this new law says we can take electronic signature because anything electronic is now tenable in law. We accept it as being okay. So these are just few. There's so many other provisions like that if we continue to beat an old car, it cannot be as good as a brand new. So what we've done now is to overhaul and reenact, and I think it's the right thing to do. But it doesn't take out your comment about the essence of implementation, because at the end of the day, It doesn't matter how this good law is. If you don't implement it well, you won't get the results you're looking for. And the analogy I normally use is, you cannot make a good meal without good ingredients. But even having the good ingredients, it's not a guarantee that you make a good meal.
That is true. Andrew, this question says CBN has just cut its interest rate on savings to 1.25%. Is this a wise move to help the economy?
Well, I think our position over the years has been, in many ways, the country looks to CBN to do things that it's not capable of doing. So, I mean, the thing is that CBN or any central bank has a few tools at their disposal, interest rates, CRR. We've introduced the lending to deposit ratio. I think at one level, a lot of times the CBN's policies end up having unintended consequences. So, for example, if you take the FX thing for a moment, people might sort of say, we understand trying to get the scarce FX to the places that need it, but you forget sometimes that every product has both imported and things made at home to produce it. So a factory operating in Nigeria needs some imported ingredient to be able to produce, to make what it makes, or imported spare parts. And then by having these FX restrictions, it creates huge imperfections in the market. It ends up harming employment and production in Nigeria. And I think that the manipulation of the interest rates by the CBN may be in the same category. I mean, what we're getting now is a situation which there's a term for this, financial repression, where interest rates are held below the rate of inflation, which harms particularly savers, obviously, but most people at the bottom of the pyramid don't have other options for investing. So, but at a general level, the analogy we use is the economy, the structure of the economy is like a race car, and the CBN is like the race car driver. So they have a few tools at their disposal, but if you put the governor and the DGs into a 1920 race car, it's only going to go as fast as a 1920 race car. If you build a 1960s race car, it'll go as fast as a 1960 race car. If you build a 2020 race car, F1 car, it'll go that fast. So the limit, there's a high limit, whether it's interest rates, FX. The CBN can harm the economy by not using their levers effectively, but they're not able to restructure the economy to really take off. So a lot of times our position is simply that, it's an interesting policy, but given the scale of structural issues in the economy, it's not going to make much difference. And I think to tie in what Taiwo has been talking about, something like CAMA can make a significant difference if implemented properly on that. But the individual decisions, NPR rates, MCC rates, etc., at the CBN don't make a huge difference.
Thank you, Andrew. I will direct this question to Tokunbo. Tokunbo, the volume of fake news, obviously this is a part of our new normal. How can journalism combat the peril of fake news and misinformation?
Yeah, it's a very good question, especially in the context of Nigeria. It all comes down to having that critical eye. I think whenever, as a journalist, you come across any piece of information, it's about looking at it critically and trying to decipher if is what I'm receiving correct. You have to make sure that you are checking other sources, reputable sources, to confirm any information before you convey that to your readers. It's worth also not trying to. It's worth also helping readers navigate through the fake news as well. So in certain instances, you don't want to just ignore that fake news exists. You want to actually highlight it to the audience, and then step them away from that information. So actually highlight that, okay, this is something that has been reported, but it is not correct, and by our additional research, we have found that this is the right piece of information that you should be receiving. So I think we don't just need people that are going to provide good information, but we also need people that are highlighting what is false, and then guiding readers through that. I think Google has started this fake news tracker, and I think there's a website called Africa Check, Black News Check as well, that has some tools to help you check some things very quickly. So, you can also use those tools if you need to do a fact check on certain instances or information that you come across in Nigeria. But all in all, I think once you make sure that you are being very critical and, trying not to just copy anything you see on media, even in our own space, there are things that are reported by other people that you can't just take as Bible or as correct. You kind of also have to look at it with a critical eye and think, okay, it has been reported, but is it actually correct? Because it's not often the case that everything that has been published is correct information. It doesn't have to be on WhatsApp for it to be fake news. Very reputable, even global publishers have found themselves accidentally publishing fake news in certain instances. So it just really highlights how, as a journalist, you have to make sure that you do that extra check before you publish any information. And I do admit it's difficult with tight deadlines, but you definitely don't want to be that person. It's worse when you find out you've submitted something wrong and you submitted something late. So yeah.
Thank you, Tukumo. My next question, Taiwo. What do you think the role of infrastructural development and regulation is in the ease of doing business in Nigeria, and how would you rate government's efforts in these areas?
Yeah, so the role of infrastructure and regulation is huge. If you want to put it into percentages, I'll say, in fact, much greater than 50%. So which means you can't make any headway without infrastructure and the quality of regulation in terms of the ease of doing business. Just to put it in context, when the ERGP was put together a few years back, there was a study that compared the inventory of infrastructure in Nigeria to GDP with a few other countries. And at the time, Nigeria was at 35% of GDP in the value of infrastructure inventory. South Africa was at 87%. So if you take 87% of GDP, compare it to 35%, that's a gap of about 52%. If you convert that into the value of our GDP today, we are easily talking about well over 60 trillion naira. So which means as of today, if South Africa stopped developing its infrastructure, Nigeria needs to spend over 60 trillion just to get to the level of South Africa. We're not even talking about developed countries yet. So in the area of infrastructure, we are significantly deficient. The ones we have are not being thoroughly maintained. We have decaying infrastructure and so on and so forth. Regulations, again, a lot of things that are no longer necessary because we're not very dynamic in the way we review our laws and regulations. There are regulations that even people who are enforcing them can't remember or don't know why the rules are there. Somebody just told them you have to do that, and that's what they've been doing diligently, but coming in the way of business. How is Nigeria doing? In terms of infrastructure and regulation, we can do better. We can do better. That's the way I'll put it. We need to get to a point where, I think Nigeria should have a goal to be one of the top 10 in the world. There are countries like Singapore that you can register a business in just one day, and you don't need to go to any special office that they call one-stop. That's if you can do a one-stop office for people to register easily, why don't you just replicate it? It's not like there are some people who like difficulties when they want to do business. So Nigeria needs to do a lot more to get to where we need to be, particularly at this time where we're having issues with COVID-19, economic decline, but also very high unemployment rates.
Thank you, Taiwo. My next question, I think, Andrew, the number one challenge with reporting on the economy is often around finding the right data at the right time. How can reporters get around this challenge?
Well, I don't think that it's realistic for reporters. They're not going to develop their own data sets. So I think that what they should do is use the official statistics and they should have enough knowledge of the sector to be able to caveat it appropriately. So one of the things, if you read our bulletins, for example, we actually make a statement about the fact that the official statistics, we have such a large formal economy, and this precision issue I talked about a little bit earlier. But I think that if you should be quoting official statistics, and then you should have enough knowledge of that area to be able to say, or talking to experts to sort of give some deeper perspective on that number. So, for example, if we go back to GDP for a moment, which we always talk about, you should be able to say NBS said this about GDP, but we know this amount is informal. That range is these sorts of numbers. So to give a more nuanced view on it, but I don't think you can create a separate kind of category of statistics on this. But whenever you use official statistics, you should give some very kind of precise, what exactly is being provided. I mean, one of the problems we have with these official statistics is we call them official statistics, and people sometimes come back to me and they're critical of the World Bank and the numbers they have for Nigeria. Well, the World Bank is not producing statistics for the country or any country. What's happening is the countries are producing statistics, but then they go through whatever black box, opaque process to do that no one really knows the details, and then they get picked up by the World Bank, the IMF, CIA Factbook, and then once they're published by those people give them more credence than they have. So that would be my counsel. Quote the official statistics, caveat the official statistics, understand how they're produced, and then kind of go deeper by talking to various experts to give some context on how meaningful those numbers are. But it's not realistic to start to produce your own statistics.
Thank you, Andrew. So, Tokumbo, I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of related. I think the question is to do with journalism and research, having a research lab to aid journalists with background information. Is there anything that you think would help?
Yeah, so I think if we're going to if we stick to the economy as an example, I think what Andrew said about being able to caveat information or data that you have, I think as a journalist, if you're covering the economy, there's no reason why you should not know the MBS website and the data it produces, almost, right at the forefront of your mind. I think you need to understand how the MBS makes its data, how the MBS actually calculates, how the MBS estimates its data. You need to understand what exactly it means. A measure like GDP, you need to know that GDP has a certain purpose. And GDP doesn't measure happiness, for example. It doesn't measure, if you're working too hard, and you're stressed, GDP increases, right? It doesn't measure these things. It's not supposed to do that. It doesn't mean GDP is a bad measure, but it's bad when you don't use it the right way. So those nuances are stuff that, as a journalist, you need to make sure you're on top of. And as Andrew said, you can do that through talking, to experts or doing, some research on your own. But in order to do that background, to provide that background or context for your readers, you just have to do the research. It sounds simple by saying, and obviously involves a lot of work. But whenever you see a story or you see a data point or a report by the NBS or any institution from the government, for example, your immediate response has to be, what is the background information behind this number? Where is the number from? Who calculated it? Who reported it? What has this number been in the past? Is this number always high? I always tell my journalists there's no point providing a number if you don't provide context for it. It's almost useless to the reader. If you just tell the reader, the stock exchange is now up, 2% today, right? It's like, okay, is that something that happens on a daily basis? Is 2% more than what normally happens on a daily basis? What is the background as to why it increased by 2%? So to get that background and to get that context that you need, you just have to have that automatic response of every time you come across information, what is the background or what is the research I need to do to allow me to provide my readers with one, more insight, and two, the background that they need to understand the number better. So I think in general, which has been, I probably repeated it 10 times today, in general, it really just comes down to research. Journalism, you can't, the difference between, for me, and this is how we operate at Spheres, the difference between a journalist, and an analyst in, say, a PwC or any of those, top institutions, I think the amount of research that's going into the work shouldn't be too dissimilar. Like I said, it's the output that's different, but in terms of doing that clarity of thought and doing the research to get that clarity of thought, you need to be working at almost the same level, operating at the same level to allow you to do that properly.
Thank you for that. Taiwo, considering the state of the nation's economy and with reference to our position right now on global competitiveness, and also with the challenges we're facing with COVID, is this the right time to be discussing CAMA?
Yes, it's the right time. I even think that we are moving too slowly. By now, we should have, there are countries where they've been passing laws in 48 hours. We have the stimulus bill with the National Assembly, and it's been there for months, and despite the crisis we are facing. So CAMA coming at this right time, in my view, is in order. Is in order because some of the provisions that we highlighted, like accepting electronic documents, virtual AGMs, these are things that we need at this time because we're trying to limit physical movement. In fact, I saw the public notice by the Corporate Affairs Commission saying that don't come to our Abuja office. We don't want physical interactions anymore. Go this, go that, upload your documents. So I think the timing is right. It's not a law that is imposing penalties. So the only penalties there are penalties for violations. If you commit fraud, if you misrepresent, and those are not things that you want to reduce just because you're in a crisis. There's no right time to do the wrong thing. So in terms of the increases in amount and charges under the CAMA is to do with penalties. In fact, the fees for filing returns have been reduced by, up to about, I think, over 35%. So this is, in my view, coming at the right time.
Thank you for that. Andrew, how would you describe the move by CBN to include maize importation in the 41-item list of the ban? What will a foreign investor whose focus is on poultry and livestock investment make out of this policy?
Well, I think that we've been clear over the years, and Egypt, took the decision a few years ago to deregulate the Forex market. I mean, I think that the Forex market is one of these things where you really have the kind of law of unintended consequences. So if I said to you, we're going to focus Nigeria's scarce FX on the things that really make a difference to the economy, that might sound like a sensible policy. The problem is when you get into the details of it, the administrative burden to try to track, what's going on with the FX, the capability for kind of round tripping, the energy that's expended by both companies and banks and the CBN on trying to manage all of this. And then you create more, we use this term dead capital, but people understand that if you're trying to file your form to get the FX, you've got to have the Naira cash there. So you're sitting there in the current context, for example, you have a parallel market which has come in a bit to say 440 today. You filed the paperwork to try to get FX at 390 because that's a significant difference. The Naira sits there. It's become dead capital for weeks or months, or perhaps, forever if it's never. So the net dead weight cost of trying to enforce this exchange regime is so high it outweighs any benefit. And a couple of the costs that come in are this one you just highlighted. So it makes sense. You ban maize. We should be able to grow maize here. The problem is, as we're currently constructed, people have invested in the poultry industry. So they're creating value through the poultry industry. They're creating employment. We're growing stuff, agricultural, food supply chain, security. That's all fantastic. But there's an input into here, which is the maize to feed the chickens, and now that's banned. So then it creates huge issues. But at a more macro level, I mean, we said this 4 years ago. We said it to the CBN. We've said it publicly, that if you have this kind of exchange rate regime, people will not invest in Nigeria. But Nigerians won't invest in Nigeria, and others won't invest. And the net result is, while we have the total capital investment in Nigeria, or gross capital formation in economist terms, is about half of what it needs to be. And we are mathematically guaranteed to grow at 1 to 2% at our level of investment. To grow at 6 to 8%, we need, as I said, about double. So by having this exchange rate regime, we're guaranteeing that we're going to get poorer and poorer per capita. So we kind of understand, some of the logic that leads us to this place, but the unintended consequences are creating real issues for us. And the maize example is just another indication of the fact that this policy is not working for the country.
All right, Taiwo, I want to continue with the question.
Yes, I wanted to ask why we wait for Delia to take one of the questions that I see on the platform. Okay, thank you. So, and I think the question from Philip from Daily Times, saying in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, taxation seems to be the last resort for government, as it has been increasing of late. And he's wondering, is taxation the way to go for revenue generation? I think my answer would be certainly no. Raising tax revenue by way of increasing the tax rate or introducing new taxes is almost like saying you have a patient on life support and you're thinking of reducing the oxygen or switching off the respirator or life support machine. This is a time when countries around the world are trying to enable and support their business, because they need those businesses to survive so they can pay taxes in the future. If you tax them to death now, then there will be no businesses to pay taxes after the pandemic. But I think that, so I'll say three things. There shouldn't be new taxes, number one. Number two, there shouldn't be higher rates for existing taxes. And number three, there shouldn't be increased burden, compliance burden for businesses. But there are people and businesses that haven't been paying their fair share of taxes even before COVID-19. If government goes after them, then that's fine. Because what you're looking for is not introducing new taxes, you're looking for new taxpayers. So to the extent that government is looking at areas of how can we cut waste and inefficiency. So for me, I find it disappointing that even the Revised Appropriation Act still has a provision of 2 billion naira for National Assembly Library at a time when we say that there's no money. So if you can cut waste, right, get MDAs to remit all the revenue they generate rather than spending it in violation of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, get government to focus more on how do you maximize the little amount of money you have, and how do you get everyone who has the ability to pay and that has not been paying to pay at this time. That would be the approach to tax revenue generation in a crisis such as this.
Thank you, Taiwo. Perhaps we should just continue with you, because this question is also for you. It says, with Nigeria's record of oppressive regulation, such as the NBC and the Ministry of Information, the 5 million fines for media houses caught in hate speech, do you think CAMA will be any different?
Yeah, so I think that, Nigerians have every reason to be concerned. Again, back to the point I made earlier on around the trust deficit. So we don't trust our government. Government sometimes does not even look like they trust their people anyways. So you have these concerns and they're legitimate. But the point about CAMA is the only aspect of CAMA that is open to abuse is essentially to do with incorporated trustees, these bits around NGOs. if government wants to abuse the powers they have, even the old CAMA can be abused, because that old CAMA gives the Corporate Affairs Commission the power to dissolve. So it's not even about appointing managers and interim managers. You can dissolve the association on the basis of whatever allegations you may have, including public interest that is sometimes neither here nor there. So the risk of an abuse of processes and laws and regulations is always there, no matter how good the law might be. Does CAMA increase that risk? I would say not necessarily, because for a lot of other, this is a law that has over 800 sections. So for the vast majority of those provisions of the law, they're not open to abuse. It's just a question of implementing them properly to be able to harvest and harness the benefits. Where the risk of abuse is, and this is why we are calling on government, the law provides for regulation by the minister. So various stakeholders, instead of just saying no, should now be putting together recommendations for the regulation that they want, to make sure that there are safeguards for the implementation to prevent abuse. And then we can say in the medium to long term, see how you can make amendments to the law by a bill through the National Assembly.
Thank you, Taiwo. I will direct this question to Andrew. Andrew, past and present administrations have spoken about diversification, and we have also talked about that in all our reports, but so far it appears we have fallen short on action. How do you think we can make progress on this?
Well, I think that, at my age, well, I won't disclose my age, but been around a long, long time. I mean, you kind of realize people or companies or countries don't really change until there's no choice. And I think to some extent, the 2015 to 2020 period, we've had this kind of, below population growth rate, so more and more poor people, more and more poverty in the country, more and more unemployment, but we haven't reached the kind of crisis tipping point. I think maybe so while we talk about ERGP, for example, talks about diversification, there really isn't enough momentum for action. And the way, just my own personal view of this, is when I deal with people in the government, in the state, and the federal government, there's probably 70-80% of people that want to do the right thing, but there's also people that are either through apathy or through direct opposition trying to block it, and that's sufficient to block the change that the country needs to move forward. I guess the question now is, with the fiscal crisis and the current economic situation and dramatic economic pressure, increase in poverty, increase in unemployment, have we kind of reached the tipping point where the country has no choice on that? And you go back to something that Taiwo, of course, has said for years. I mean, the complexity of doing anything, and particularly doing business in Nigeria, is just mind-boggling. And so many investors. I mean, there are many people who have the courage to give it a try, but there are many others that don't come, both Nigerians and foreigners. And the net result is, our economy is shrinking. But given the stage we're at, I think we may have reached the tipping point where there's no choice, and there might be let's call it a bit of a forced restructuring, which would allow other industries. And we don't need government policy to diversify. I mean, I see everyday clients and others that want to do, whether it's in fintech or in gas to power, small modular refineries, mining, manufacturing, Nollywood, other services, food and beverage. People, Nigerians are so entrepreneurial. It's just waiting to burst out, and the government, in effect, has to do less. But I mean, we've had an income per capita drop of 10% year over year when you take the population growth into account. that level of economic pain, I have to believe, is going to cause some decisions, and also because partially at some level the government loses control. So you go back to the FX issue with the CBN. I mean, the CBN can control the FX market when it has dollars to play its part. When it doesn't have dollars, it becomes in effect less and less relevant. So yes, we've talked diversification for a long time, but there hasn't necessarily been that forcing mechanism. Maybe we're there, but I'm not quite sure what to think if we don't take advantage of this crisis for real diversification, what the future holds over the next 5 years.
Thank you, Andrew. Taiwo, there's a question here about NGOs and CAMA. It says, based on CAMA 2020, does it mean that consent to register NGOs is no longer free for all?
Yeah, no. I think I need to make a distinction here. So there's you can register different types of entities under CAMA. So one of these is a company limited by guarantee. So a company limited by guarantee essentially means you don't even need to bring the capital to start the organization, and people are dealing with you on the basis that if anything goes wrong, the trustees or the promoters have individually guaranteed a certain sum of money they will pay to make good those liabilities. For example, the Nigerian Stock Exchange was a company limited by guarantee until very recently, when they're trying to be a regular PLC. So those kinds of organizations that are limited by guarantee are the ones where you need the consent of the AGF. For you to start an association, like an NGO, the likes of Bodies or Sarah, or a church or a mosque, and you want to register it, you do not need the consent of the AGF. The process under the new CAMA, which is similar to the old CAMA, is that you have to apply, then you do a name search, and then you do a publication in 2 newspapers, one of which must be a national daily. So, of course, because we don't want you to use a name that someone already has reserved or somebody has an issue with. And once there's no objection within 28 days, you're good to go and you can register.
Thank you, Taiwo. I thought you might be able to explain that better, so that's great. Andrew, would you explain the reason behind the rise or increase of figures provided by MBS and made available to the public? The example is the PMS, AGO, amongst others.
I saw that question. I guess I have to confess I don't always know how they produce different numbers. I mean, I think that I have a lot of confidence in that. But to go back to what we've been discussing here, I think that journalists need to, what Takumbo said, the journalists need to understand how these figures are produced on that. And I think there's a lot of detail. If you go into the NBS website, we tend to focus on the headline GDP, which I don't think is the best report. And I think inflation I've never been happy with. But I do think that they do a lot of, when they do detailed kind of household survey work, you get better numbers. So, for example, things like the food price in various places on that. I mean, the unemployment poverty work that they hadn't done for 6 quarters, or sort of more than 6 quarters, but that just came out, again, that's done with household surveys. So I think that sort of stuff is accurate. But I mean, when numbers jump around, the role of the journalist is to sort of dive in and, they need to figure out that. So, and give some context. So if you see a big movement in a number that's from the MBS, that's, I think, something that the journalists need to go out and write about and talk about and just give it some context.
Thank you. Takumbo, this question is for you. It's been a challenging time for reporters and their organizations because, just like you mentioned in your presentation, it's been a challenge in getting at adverts and readership, hence poor sales. No palliative was targeted at the sector. How can reporters survive and still do their jobs at this time?
Hi, yes, things have been quite difficult, especially as you mentioned, as the question mentioned. Many publications have relied, very, very much on revenue, and even events as well. I know a few publications are very big with events. Obviously, events have kind of switched tacks as time goes by. For example, we're having this event, through an online platform, but that has made things very, very difficult. I think for publications, it's time for them to start looking at other ways to make revenue that isn't related to advertising. Like I said, a few have started to switch towards focusing on consumers. And that's not even something that's restricted to just a publication. Many journalists have their own separate blog that they charge their consumers for. There are a few examples even in Nigeria. I know Joey Akan has one. I know people like Nonso have something similar, a newsletter. There's also the CEO, the founder of Iroko TV, also has content that he writes that you have to pay for to access. So that's something that journalists should also start thinking about. And again, how do you do that? You need to make your stuff unique, and it needs to have insight. It has to have value add that people will say, okay, this is worth paying for. So I think that is one way that journalists and obviously the media publications themselves have to start thinking of, because the advertising game is becoming difficult. It was difficult before the pandemic, and the pandemic has increased, that rate of decline. And so things have very much become difficult for media across, even broadcasting has become difficult. And, it's time for, I guess, journalists to start finding other ways to receive value for their content, not through advertisers, but directly with consumers themselves.
Thank you for that response, Okongo. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to be done. I will refer this question to Taiwo. Taiwo, I know you're a champion of small businesses. How do you think they can survive in this period with all the issues that we have talked about?
Yeah, so it's a very difficult time for small businesses. So they are unfortunately more disproportionately impacted by the impact of COVID-19. A lot of it is also to do with the structure of the economy and the way we have traditionally carried out our businesses, with a lot of very physical commercial activities, face-to-face, movement of cash and all of that. So suddenly customers have disappeared because they are all hiding in their homes and trying to limit physical interactions. Suddenly you find that even before COVID-19, SMEs could not access capital and credit, and even now it becomes even harder for them to be able to access all of that. So those challenges are there. But what can they do? I think it's to, for a small business owner to just take a step back and say, what are the challenges that I face? Because I'll say the COVID-19 reality for everyone is different. So there are those issues that cut across. People don't move around easily, not enough money in society, there's unemployment. Those are general issues. But you find that when you narrow it down to what affects you, there are SMEs who have grown more than 100% just because of the pandemic. There are people who have picked up new opportunities in new sectors that they never played before. There are people who have been able to find other opportunities to even collaborate with people outside Nigeria. So it's to then narrow down to what your issues are. It may be that your focus or your challenges are mostly to do with accessing credit. Then you have to look at the palliative and stimulus by the CBN, by the various agencies of government. What do you need to do to even qualify? Where can you find the knowledge to know what has been offered by various arms of government and levels of government and take advantage of that? For another person, it may be that they do not have the management capacity to manage their business. With COVID-19, many organizations, including PwC, are offering to train and support SMEs for free. And so you need to be aware that something like that so you can take advantage of it and get quality training and support for free. For some people, it may be, how do I deliver my products to my customers? Again, there are people who have already taken advantage of the pandemic to create logistics solutions. So all you just need to do is link up with them to pick your goods, deliver to your customers, and you get your money. So at the end of the day, I'll say everyone has to try and find the best way to solve their problems. And then collectively, using their association or whatever groups they have, they need to be able to channel their concerns to the appropriate authorities, not just complain on Twitter and Instagram and wait for the next complaint. We need to start thinking about how can we be part of the solution so we can move Nigeria forward.
I will still direct this question to you, Taiwo, because it's kind of related. It says, what should new businesses do when they see that CAMA is not being used in dealing with them by various government agencies? And this probably applies to other organizations as well.
Yeah, so this is an issue to do with implementation. So most times you find the law says A, or the reality you find on ground in terms of implementation is completely different from a tiny letter but A. There was a time, I can't remember, a few years back, we're trying to go to, I don't know where we're even going. We're going to one of these neighboring African countries for our away day, and then we got to the border, and the experience was unbelievable. It was my first time of even trying to cross the border by road. And I couldn't believe that we're within ECOWAS, and those guys who were supposed to implement the law were either not interested or they had no clue what the laws were in terms of movement of people. So you may find that the law has provided for a particular thing, but the agencies implementing it haven't even seen a copy of the law. So that you can't change overnight. What you can control is your knowledge and your ability to demand that the right thing be done, and then to be able to confidently do that without compromising your position. So usually I get a lot of things done, not as fast as people who would maybe pay a bribe or something, but I'll just use my knowledge to say, well, do you know what the law says? I'll open it for you and read. Usually once you come from the angle of knowledge, people tend to respect what you have to say. So as you interact with agencies, governments and other regulators, if they don't want to apply the provisions of the law that's in your favor, point it out to them. If that doesn't work, the Enabling Business Environment Secretariat under PEBEC already has a solution. So you just go online and you can initiate a complaint, and you can even put recording of videos or pictures there. And I guarantee you they actually respond actually. So report the agency and something will be done about it very quickly.
Thank you, Taiwo. One more question, I think, for you, Taiwo. I know I talked about you having distilled 600 pages of CAMA basically in this presentation. Studying it obviously is quite a task. What does it say about the aspiration of improving the ease of doing business in Nigeria? That we need to go through that volume to understand the nation's laws.
Okay, so let me understand the question. So what does CAMA say about our... Sorry?
The fact that it's such a huge document to study, does that say anything about, the ability to actually understand?
Oh, okay.
The ease of doing business.
Okay.
Right.
I think, maybe I think it must be Femi Falana that made the comment as well, which I saw on social media about how can you say you are doing ease of doing business and you produce a law that is 600 pages long? Actually, 606 pages. I don't think that means the law is complex. In fact, we have seen in the area of doing business that sometimes you can enact a law or produce a regulation that is just a page, and it is confusion incorporated. It can be wholesale confusion. Many countries, particularly the US, their laws are not the easiest anyway, but they're good at explaining stuff. So this issue we're having now with incorporated trustees and NGOs and churches, if you look at the UK law, it's a whole volume. just addressing the incorporated trustee alone. Why do they do that? Because they're trying to provide a framework and provide clarity. So I do not think that the volume and the number of pages, it's an indication that ease of doing business is more complicated. I think it's about what's in the law, how clear the content is, and sometimes to make it clear, you need to say a lot of words. So I don't think they are directly related.
Thank you. Silva, would you like to, I will hand over to Silva now, who will administer a poll. We have a short poll that we'd like to administer. If you would, please go ahead and...
Okay, Delia, thank you very much, Delia, and facilitators for that very insightful interactive session. Thank you to the participants for your questions. Now we just wanted to do a quick poll before we wrap up. We've posted a link in the chat box. So you find the chat box. I know some people have already seen it. We just want you to fill just one question, just as a question, feedback on your experience on this call, on this workshop. So I'm posting the link once again in case some have not seen it. So check. Navigate the chat area to the form. Click on the form and just answer the single question there. We would share the results of this question. We already have some responses, so 16 people have responded. So please navigate to the form and fill. We'll share the response here. Thank you.
While we're doing that, perhaps, Tokumbo, would you like to give us some final words?
Okay, sure thing, Delia. Well, again, a big thank you to PwC for this. I found this extremely useful. I think it's something that should be done a lot more often in the media space. And I'm glad to see at least 100, attendees on this list, full of journalists from different publications. I think we've heard, a few things today, and some things have stuck on my mind around, how to report economic data, understanding the background and providing the background for your readers, and, making sure that you're providing insights and not leaving, the numbers in the air for your readers to try and guesstimate themselves. I think I have tried to put the agenda of making sure you're doing journalists are doing thorough research to get those insights. The point around ensuring that your clarity of thoughts is a process that is done properly before you even begin to start writing any context or any content rather. That clarity of thought comes from research and talking to individuals, not necessarily for quotes, for your piece, but for understanding too. Using people for understanding is one way to get that background insight that you might not already have yourself. And before then going to the clarity of expression, which is then where as a writer you put down your thoughts and research in an enjoyable manner for your audience. And I think finally, the CAMA is a good example of how I think as a journalist, if you want to educate your audience on doing business, that 600-page report, I also had to read through it. I mean the law rather, not report. My mind is talking economic zone, but I'm not a lawyer. But because I am an editor and I was writing a piece on CAMA, I had to read it, and I had to also call my lawyer friends and lawyer sources to help me distill it and understand it, for me to write a piece that was insightful. So, I think journalists, we have that higher regard in that, we always have to be digging deeper than everybody else. Everybody else sees CAMA, but you need to see CAMA and go deeper understand the intricacies about it. What does it mean for businesses on ground? This is what the law says. That question about the law versus implementation was a good question. The law has said this. What will businesses actually experience? How would this impact? So I think there are many things to take from this, and I hope that you guys would then start to implement some of the things we've learned. I know I certainly will. But like Andrew said, at the beginning, I think everybody has been doing a great job in the media landscape. Things have been tough, especially since the pandemic, and even personally, dealing with public publications where revenues have fallen and there have been salary issues. So everybody has been working very hard in very tough times, and I think continue to do the good job that you're doing, just adding on these little pieces of information and knowledge that you get from places like PwC and the like. So well done, everybody, and I hope that this was a useful day. It certainly was for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kobo. We have a few minutes left, and I'll just ask Andrew and then Taiwo to please just give us final words before we give the closing remarks.
No, I just again want to thank all the people in the journalist area. It's not easy. I know you're subject to attack often by some of the forces opposed to transparency, and despite the hardships, you're doing something that is so critical for Nigerian society. And please keep the faith. And you also, while you're competitors, you're also, I think, need to support each other as journalists, and particularly with some of the things that are happening now politically in Nigeria. It's very important to kind of keep your voice and do that. So thank you so much. Keep the courage. I also think it's probably helpful to connect kind of with international journalists and people who support open journalism around the world. Sometimes when you're in this challenging situation, it's easy to get discouraged. But the forces of openness around the world, there are a lot of friends despite things that are happening in many, many countries, and you need to band together. And I think it'd be very helpful for Nigerian journalists to make as many connections outside as they can to help support that. But thank you again for all you do. It's not easy.
Okay, I think I'll just take it from there. Maybe I'll just summarize my closing comments into like 3 points. The first one is just to keep encouraging you to do what you do and see it as a national assignment, so a lot bigger than whatever you're being paid or what the challenges are. See this as trying to help Nigeria get better and take consolation in the fact that even though the general public or majority of people may not appreciate, there are a lot of us who appreciate the work that you guys do. The second point is to help us connect the dots, particularly around what government is doing at this time. So if on one hand you have the economic sustainability plan, you have stimulus package here, you have palliative here, you have the budget, you have the MTEF, and then suddenly government comes up with something that is a complete contradiction, you need to point it out. So if you help connect the dots every single time, whether you're looking at the economic metrics, whether you're looking at what government has promised to do from ERGP to other economic plan documents. So always bring this up. If it comes to do with the constitution, make a linkage. So once you bring this clarity for the public, for the policymakers, it will influence and change the way they behave. And then the last comment I have is for you to just help us stay refocused. Because for some reasons, I don't know whether this is peculiar to Nigeria, but it seems certainly that Nigeria is way higher there than other countries. We just like sensational news. Once we find something, we stick onto it until we find the next, conversation or interesting item to jump into. CAMA came out, and for the first few days, the whole conversation was around, oh, this is great for ease of doing business. The moment there was a comment around NGOs. Everybody forgot about every other thing in a law that has so many provisions, and we just focus on like one or two sections, and that has been the conversation since then. So the question is, I'm wondering, who is going to refocus us back to say, well, don't forget about the other sections of the law. How does this affect doing business by small businesses, by private companies, by large firms, even multinationals? And one of my concerns is I was hoping the new CAMA would allow foreign companies to do business in Nigeria by just registering a branch. In many countries that I know, you can operate by just opening a branch. UBA has a branch in the US. It doesn't mean that they are not responsible there. In Nigeria, you have to incorporate a subsidiary. And what this means is if you are doing a project for just in a couple of years, you have to incorporate the process of dissolving that entity you register is very frustrating, and that can then discourage you from even coming to Nigeria in the first place. So we need to highlight different aspects of this very important law, how it will affect our lives and doing business in the short, medium, and long term, and keep the focus of the relevant stakeholders, including government, private sector, international community, the civil society, to stay on the issues and make sure that we're getting better each day than the previous. So again, I would like to add to the commendation, for those of you who have joined us and for staying all the way till the end, and also to appreciate everyone. It's not closely remarkable, in particular to for your insight and for your contribution to this. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Taiwo. Thank you. Just before we come to the closing remarks, it's quite gratifying to see that over 85% of you think that this session has been very useful. We really appreciate your having stayed throughout this. We know it's not easy for media people to be connected like this at the time. I would like to appreciate our facilitator, Tokumbo Afikirioni, whose prompt response to our invitation and his generosity in making his time and knowledge available is much appreciated. I'd like to thank our partners, Andrew and Taiwo, for their time and their insights, and ever willing to always engage with our friends in the media. I also want to thank you all, our participants, for attending this session and for the very engaging and I believe very instructive sessions we have had. I certainly appreciate all of you who have engaged in particular with our materials that we send to you from time to time and reported our news stories over this month and in fact before this month and during this pandemic as well. We certainly do not take this lightly, and we'll continue to create platforms to engage and appreciate you for the work that you do. And speaking about platforms, I hope that all of you have sent in your entries for the Media Excellence Awards. The entries close at midnight today, and we look forward to welcoming you to the Media Excellence Awards event on Friday, the 2nd of October, 2020. Finally, just to say, you will receive notice on how to claim your certificate for participating in this session in the coming days. And I think I also mentioned that you will also get the recording as well. So on that note, I would like to say thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day, and please keep safe. Thank you for now.